Now, my next guest knows a lot about fighting for racial justice. In 1992, she was in her first term in Congress when parts of her LA district saw the violence and unrest after the acquittal of those officers, also caught on tape. It was in the beating of Rodney King. She pushed to invite herself to the White House to press those issues with then-President George H.W. Bush, and has worked on them her entire career. We are rejoined by Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters of California, chair of the Financial Services Committee. Good evening to you.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for asking.
Well, I'm delighted to be here with you.
It's great to have you back. I know we're on a slight delay. You're keeping safe and everything?
Yes, absolutely. It's a challenge, but we have to do it. And one of the things I want to do is have all of us serve as good examples by making sure we do the social distancing and we're wearing our masks and we're not, creating large crowds and attending large events.
Yep. I hear you on that. And as a policymaker and a leader, you using this platform to remind people of that. I suppose, Congresswoman, I want to pick up where we left off in our last conversation, because you said something that resonated with me, and I heard some viewers who I hear from time to time notice it too, which is for all your work, which we mentioned, you were giving credit, saying the protesters pushed farther and got policymakers in Congress to move more than some of the professionals. Now we're in this place where you and Speaker Pelosi and others have led this House bill. We reported on that. We're seeing this action in various courtrooms, including what I mentioned today. And obviously, life goes on. We're not seeing all the protests to the same degree, although we continue to report on those aspects. What do you see as the next step or phase in this movement?
Well, I think there are several steps to be taken. One is we have to really take a look at the kind of crimes that are committed by the people that we pay to protect and serve us, and see if they fall in the category of civil rights violations. And I think that we have to take a look at that because we have been referring some of these crimes to the Department of Justice, and they have been oftentimes rejected, or people didn't seem to be quite sure whether or not they were captured by the civil rights laws. And I think we've got to pay a lot of attention to that. The other thing that I would like to see happen, aside from what we do at the federal level, I would like to see more pressure put on the members of city councils and mayors. They hold the purse strings. They're the ones with the budgets of the police departments. They're the ones who determine whether or not they get raises. They're the ones who determine whether or not they're paying, lots of overtime, as we see in Los Angeles. They're the ones who decide what the pensions are and whether or not they're going to embellish them, et cetera, et cetera. They have not used their influence or their power because they have been made, to believe that if they do some of these things, that the police unions will organize lots of money against them and cause them not to be reelected. So the police protective leagues have had an outsized role in determining what city council members and mayors do, and members are not willing to cross them. They're afraid of them. And we've got to pay attention to that power and see what we can do to lessen that power, to make sure that they cannot exert the kind of influence they have exerted traditionally.
Yeah, it's a really important point. When we've covered these, I've had people ask sometimes, well, what is exactly the holdup, particularly in perhaps more liberal districts and communities where you might think there was more cause for reform, and the police unions and the police themselves sometimes are not being overseen in a traditional way. They are negotiating and leveraging these discussions, as you just explained. I want to play a little bit of George Floyd's uncle, who was at that courtroom today where they're going through the process of these murder charges for the killing of George Floyd. Take a listen.
I think the more media that we have on this case, the more resolve we'll get. And this is just absolutely insane that we all are gathered here to talk about my nephew getting murdered by a damn madman in the middle of the street. For what reason? Because of the color of his skin. I'm mad at the system. The system should have had better order in place. What was he going to do? Hell, he couldn't get up and run. What could he do? And we all sat there and just watched him get brutally tortured and murdered.
I'm curious what you think about the balance between listening to the people affected and their voices being out there, which obviously is part of the reason there are charges in the first place. And the other news I mentioned, which is that the judge, and in fairness, as you know, is pretty standard in a lot of these cases, the judge is saying, okay, now there are charges, let the case play out. They don't want a lot of public commentary from the participants. But isn't it partly public commentary and activism that got us here?
Absolutely. And I want to tell you, without the kind of protests that we have seen, we would not have so many people saying, oh my goodness, things have got to change. And that's not simply Black people, it's whites and all races saying and taken to the streets, and young people taken to the streets. We saw everything out there. We saw Asians, we saw Indians, we saw Blacks, we saw whites, etc. No, this change and this talk of change would not be happening without the kind of protest that we have witnessed. And you know, people don't like protests. They are afraid of protests. But of course, this is what is guaranteed to us by our Constitution that we should be able to do. And sometimes all of the attention is on the violence that sometimes is caused, or some of the wreckage that's caused by some of the protesters. But that is minor in relationship to the numbers who are on the positive side of this and talking about change. And so I hear what the judge is saying, but, you know, tradition has not worked for us. And so whether you're talking about paying attention to police chiefs who, too, are captured by the police unions, or your city council members who are saying that they just can't get it done, or your mayors who are electing, you know, these police chiefs and don't want to be accountable to them. All of that is tradition, and that's got to be done away with. And the only way it's going to happen is with the protests of people taken to the streets in the way that we have witnessed.
Well, you know, we always learn different things from you. I was just jotting down what you said. Tradition has not worked for us.
That's right.
That is so striking, because we go to school. I don't care whether you're in middle school or law school, and you learn about the history. You have these words, and some traditions are nice, and some of our history we could be proud of. But the notion that tradition and history, when it comes to racism and civil rights in this history, is exactly what needs to be overturned. A fitting thought for us to reflect on. Congressman Waters, it's good to see you. I hope you'll come back.
Thank you. Well, you put it very well. I like the way you did that. Thank you so very much.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm quoting you. We'll see you again soon, Congresswoman. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.